Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar on the Carnarvon DER Trials Update. My name is Kelvin Say. I'm a Research Fellow at the Energy Transition Hub in the University of Melbourne, and I specialise in DER market integration. So before we begin, please join me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands from which we are joining this webinar, and in paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today's webinar is being hosted by the Climate and Energy College and the Energy Transition Hub, and is part of a series of 8 webinars on consumer-centric energy, and is sponsored by the Victorian Clean Technology Fund. So this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Climate and Energy and Energy Transition websites by tomorrow. At the later part of this webinar, it will be running as a Q&A session, so please submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature, which will be found at the bottom of your screen. And please upvote questions that you particularly like to be answered. So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce you to our speaker. And over the course of my PhD, David's been a fountain of knowledge on what DER systems are capable of. So David is a Digital Strategy and Innovation Manager in the Technology and Digital Transformation Division at Horizon Power in Western Australia. He's pioneered change in fields as diverse as television and music industry, renewable energy generation, regional service delivery, and science mega projects such as the Square Kilometre Array. Currently at the forefront of energy sector transformation, David uses problem-focused style of leadership to identify the value-add of solutions and to demonstrate the art of the possible. So David contributes to several national working groups on distributed energy resources while leading research and development into future smart energy networks. He displays a rare combination of sharp intellect, boundless curiosity, practical creativity. He's a neat habit of asking probing questions in a non-threatening spirit of solidarity and then following up with the answer with another one. So David's an international speaker, ardent swimmer, music lover, and a published author and father of 3. So now this is where I hand off, and the floor is now yours, David.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. Okay, here we go. Hopefully this will go like that. And can you see the presentation okay, Kelvin?
Yes, I can.
Cool. All right. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for inviting me to give everybody an update on the Carnarvon distributed energy resource trials, which we're running in Carnarvon. They're a 3-year project, and they're coming to the end of their tenure as we're sort of moving into the reporting phase. What I'll be doing is I'll talk about the trials, some of the work that we're doing. Obviously, it's a 3-year trial, so I can't fit everything in, but I've chosen some of the highlights that I think will fit with the audience. And I'll also be talking about our partner in Murdoch University, who are providing us with a series of engineering-based reports and recommendations around the management of very high levels of distributed energy resources in a microgrid setting. And these reports will actually provide a foundation to support our adoption of DER management technologies and the creation of innovative customer-facing products. I'll be covering moving from centralized generation to decentralized generation, which is a little bit about our business model, visibility and control of DER, data acquisition, behind the meter control of DER, voltage studies, power factor control, phase identification, and battery optimization. And then there'll be a slide at the end to just give you an update of where we're at. Thank you for doing an acknowledgement to country, Kelvin. I'd like to do the same thing. I'd like to show my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Whadjuk people, their elders, past, present, and emerging, from which this presentation is taking place, and also the First Nations people in the lands in which you are watching this presentation. So to provide you with a little bit of context, Horizon Power is the electricity provider for regional West Australia. Perth and the surrounding regions, which are down in the bottom left-hand of this graph, are serviced by Western Power and Synergy. Horizon Power covers the rest of the state. We have 38 microgrids spread across a service area of 2.3 million square kilometres, and that includes 17 Aboriginal communities, and we are expanding that number as I speak. We have a uniform tariff across our domestic customers, which sees them pay the same rate as the customers in Perth. And we are the last remaining vertically integrated utility left in Australia. What's interesting about our situation is our cost to supply energy far exceeds what we can charge for it in many of our towns. So we make a loss for every kilowatt hour that we sell. And Not in all of our towns. In some of the towns we make good money, but the deficit is made up by a mechanism called the Tariff Equalisation Fund, which is covered by the government. So it gives us a really unique opportunity to leverage renewable energy. And we already have quite high penetrations of renewable energy in many of our towns. So we've seen PV generation grow over the years to become the largest single generation source on many of our geographically isolated networks. Solar PV has changed the load profile presented to the power station. Many of you will be familiar with the duck curve. We don't quite have that in all of our towns because our load profile is a little bit different, with very high usage of air conditioning from about 3 o'clock onwards, but we are starting to move in that direction. And what we're seeing is the withdrawal of premium feed-in tariffs and the arrival of batteries are going to change that load profile again. The interesting thing for all of us, I think, is that the bulk of the new generation coming into our networks will not be coming from highly reliable utility-grade equipment, but it will be coming from consumer-grade electronics that we don't own, and we don't have control over the vast majority that's out there at the moment. The dispatch won't be secured by the kinds of contracts and certainty that we've become used to over the last 30 years. So how do we address these challenges and embrace the uncertainty whilst preserving system stability, power quality, and reliability? And what methods could we use to de-risk this future state? What we know is that we won't find the answers to these questions in the way that we've done business over the last 50 years. So we know that rooftop solar is becoming cheaper every day almost, and it creates a new set of management and technical variability challenges. With the Carnarvon DER trials, we're seeking to understand the impact of cloud events on renewable energy variability and how that manifests itself onto the network and thus up to the power station. How does weather affect renewable energy generation and customer load? And if we had visibility of DER performance and control over some parameters of the DER, how could we use that information to de-risk the impact on power quality and service delivery? Can we leverage Industry 4.0 frameworks to develop new products that more effectively serve our customers? And can we leverage visibility and control of DER to manage the potential for very high penetration DER and reduced costs? Our hypothesis is that we can use feed-in management or flexible export limits to release more hosting capacity for DER on our networks. So we started to look at the principles of Industry 4.0 as a means of gaining visibility and control over DER. Using data from smart connected devices, could we provide some operational insights? For example, how could we separately meter the PV from the load? Could we create situational insights which we could leverage to provide value to customers? And could we use advanced analytics applied to the collected data in a data lake to optimize power system performance? We're trying to create win-win outcomes for the customers and for Horizon Power. And by exploring orchestration of DER to maximize their value to the power system, how could we exchange that value with customers? So what I'm showing here on this slide is a sort of a transition from a physical product to a digital product, a kind of an ecosystemic view to how you deliver your services. Industry 4.0 gives us a chance to rethink our service delivery and imagine what a future power system could look like. This slide shows the transformation pathway from a core physical product to a digital ecosystem. So what steps could we take to evolve from a physical product to a digital ecosystem with customers at the heart of value creation? By augmenting our business intelligence with advanced meters and other data sources such as weather, power station data, or socioeconomic metrics, and by using advanced analytics to improve network operation by optimizing DER performance, we're seeking to provide customers with a more interactive experience from buying their electricity. I think it's interesting that many other parts of the way we live and the way we do business have moved into a very digitized world. And customers' expectations is that energy will move with the tide and that they will have a corresponding experience in the way that they consume and generate electricity. So providing customers with apps that display energy usage, visualizations of consumption, and maybe offering them flexible billing options, we can start to move towards an ecosystemic approach to delivering energy. The network could become a platform on which customers get jobs done, and we encourage them to invest in DER, and we reward them appropriately through a suite of complementary products. By taking these steps, the utility transforms into a digital utility with an ecosystemic approach to energy delivery, where the customer has become an active participant in providing energy into their community. And then as time moves on, through digital channels, we've transformed our customer relationship to one of a trusted partner. We started this project by gathering data to build the most comprehensive view of what is actually happening in the Carnarvon network. We recruited 82 customers in data gathering using the WattWatcher IoT product, which was fitted onto each one of their houses and their PV systems. Separately metering PV from load on 82 premises, we uncovered true load, which has been masked by PV for the last decade. And giving customers real insight into their renewable energy generation and load will, we hope, enable a dialogue around energy efficiency and behavioural change. This slide shows how the data is collected into our database in Bentley, where it's blended with advanced meter infrastructure and SCADA data from the power station. And we pay particular attention to the accuracy of timestamping to create a coincident data set that can be used for advanced analytics and machine learning. Now, this visualization is derived from some of the data that we collected of the PV systems on the trial participants. Each colored bar represents the renewable energy output of a PV system. The PV systems are different sizes, so here they're just scaled 0 to 100%, but together they represent approximately 3 megawatts of PV currently connected to the Carnarvon network. The data has been combined with sky camera and meteorological data to show the variation in solar PV generation as clouds move across the town on a typically cloudy day. And this visualization shows one day compressed into 1 minute and highlights the number of cloud events and the depth of impact on renewable energy generated in one day. It also shows some very interesting things, including the passage of clouds across the town and the cloud edge effect on PV generation, which can be seen on the final graph in the middle. So we've installed 10 new PV battery systems and upgraded 6 existing customers' PV systems to include a battery and a Reposit box. Customers have access to the Reposit app, showing the performance of their system, battery usage, and energy savings. A commercial solar farm in the town has received a partial upgrade so that we can control a portion of its capacity. And we're using the Reposit virtual power plant platform on these 17 DER systems to learn how to, among other things, manage the output from renewable energy flowing into the network at key times of the day. The aim is to limit the amount of energy exported from managed systems onto the network, but not to limit the customer's ability to meet their own energy requirements. Participants receive Tier 1 products with the latest inverter control features using the SunSpec protocol. And using the Reposit box, we've been testing visibility and control of PV and energy storage within a virtual power plant framework. We've also been exploring virtual power plant technology that can use DER to assist power quality rather than cause problems. And we're developing feed-in management techniques and principles of operation that preserve value for customers, as well as testing battery optimization and innovative tariff models with methods to exchange value to customers for DER activity that does not pass through the tariff meter. So for example, this could include discharging a battery during peak demand period, but which is entirely consumed behind the meter and therefore remains invisible to a retailer. Now this visualization down in the bottom left is the same PV systems again, but what's happening is this is a cloudless sunny day. Now when the bar is green, it means that the voltage is below 254 volts, but it goes red when it goes above 254 volts. And the distribution graph from our research partners, which is shown on the top right, shows a high number of voltage events detected using the WattWatcher data on the 82 PV systems. You can see that this number is quite high, and this is a problem that's becoming apparent nationally and internationally as as PV penetration increases on our networks. Here in Australia, there's a great deal of discussion around using inverter control at a primary level by adjusting response curves in the inverters themselves. So we started to explore how we could use reactive power droop curves to manage voltage, over voltage events on the network. What we discovered was unexpected and initially very interesting, but at the end of the day quite obvious, and I'll explain why on the following slides. So this slide shows on the left-hand side 6 reactive power droop curve configurations that we tested on a group of PV systems all situated on one feeder, which is shown in the map on the bottom right. The map shows the blue properties have no PV systems, the yellow properties have unmanaged PV systems that are not part of the VPP under test, and the red properties have PV systems that are part of the virtual power plant that we're exploring. The 3 graphs on the upper right-hand side, and this is the bit that you want to keep an eye on, show the maximum power exported by this feeder back into the main network through a single point of connection, the steady increase in the amount of reactive power absorbed by the inverters under test, and then the average maximum and minimum voltages on the feeder under test. And as I cycle through this visualization, what you will see is that the inverters under test actually do a really good job of absorbing reactive power and pulling the voltage down. But at the same time, what they do is they inadvertently create an operational advantage for the uncontrolled inverters, who then raise the voltage back up again so that they can export more power. So the result is twofold: a negligible reduction in the maximum voltage on the feeder, but an appreciable increase in the amount of renewable energy that's exported onto that feeder. And if you've got time to watch the 3 graphs at the top, keep an eye on the unmanaged PV system on the yellow property at the back left of the side of the visualization. So what I'll do is I'll start to cycle through the different settings, and you can see how it's changing with the various different properties. But keep an eye on the graphs at the top right, and you'll see that what's happened is the voltage hasn't changed very much. The Q absorption is quite high, but the amount of exported renewable energy from that feeder has gone significantly higher. Now this slide shows one of those unmanaged PV systems that was part of that test. Prior to reactive power control, the inverter in question was unable to operate effectively because of high volts on the feeder. During the reactive power control experiments that were performed, there was a marked improvement in the performance of the inverter because the voltage on that part of the feeder was improved. When using managed inverters to reduce network voltage, we created this operational advantage which this unmanaged system was able to take advantage of. It didn't pull down the voltage as we had hoped, but it did increase the amount of renewable energy that was exported into the network, which has a corresponding reduction in fossil fuel consumption at the power station. This raises some really interesting questions around the usefulness of Q control to manage network voltages while we still have a significant fleet of older and unmanaged systems connected to our networks. We're doing some more experiments. We're really interested to discover how much Q control is actually required to overcome the influence of unmanaged PV systems and then achieve the desired result on top. Now, what we've observed through these trials is of the 82 inverters that we are monitoring, more than 50% are not working as well as they could, which is unsatisfactory for both the customer and the network operator. Loss of PV generation is a loss of income or saving for the customer, while frequent inverter trips due to high voltage exacerbate the fluctuation factor of the renewable energy generation that is manifested to the network and ultimately to the power station, and thus that reduces hosting capacity. So we've begun to explore if it's possible to improve power system performance by physically rebalancing the network through reallocation of single-phase systems or single-phase PV systems to other less congested phases. Firstly, the application of k-means clustering analysis to advanced metadata is being used to identify the phase allocation of single-phase PV systems, and how much they are contributing to these overvoltage events. And then what we're doing is we're developing a strategy to move them to other phases so that we can reduce the load on those overloaded phases. Overloaded, when I say overloaded, I mean overloaded because of PV exports. And then in combination with that, we're running an inverter audit in the town of Carnarvon, where we're actually going and having a look at every single PV system and finding out what settings they're actually set to. And disappointingly, the first 30 that we've audited, none of them have got the right settings in. We've even found PV systems that are still set to the factory default and haven't even been set to 4777. So this is something that we're trying to investigate, because we think there's a lot of room for improvement here in PV operation and network operation. The aim here is to try and identify value creation for the customer and for the network before we have to resort to feed-in management. Now, what I'm showing with these 3 slides, and I'll flick backwards and forwards, is this is a heat map which really shows the voltage, the influence of single phase PV systems on particular phases and how much they contribute to high voltage events. And we've used this to identify a couple of inverters on this particular feeder, which we're getting changed at the moment over to other phases. And then what we'll do is we'll gather a whole bunch of data and be able to quantify the improvements. So lastly, I'd just like to talk about the smart use of batteries. What we did with one particular customer was we applied the Synergy time of use tariff to the reposit box on one customer's PV battery system. And we allowed the reposit box to control the battery charge and discharge. Now the reposit's got some quite nice features in it. And what it did was it was pre-charging the battery before 7 AM if it estimated that the solar would not provide enough energy to charge the battery during the day to meet the peak usage of that customer. And it does this by machine learning the customer's daily usage patterns and the PV production patterns. And then it pulls down a weather forecast from the reposit server, does a quick calculation, and then decides whether it wants to charge that battery before 7 AM or not. Then what it does is it holds onto that energy and discharges the battery to match the demand of the customer during the peak period. So just assuming that you've got a customer who's willing to pay 50 cents for their energy in the evening, I should say that this customer didn't know what we were doing. We kept them on the A2 tariff all the time, but we told the reposit box that they were on a completely different set of tariffs. And what we were able to do is, by using the battery in a smart way, we were able to reduce their peak time network load by 64% and reduce their network average peak load by 67%. And then assuming that the customer had moved on to this kind of tariff arrangement, but wasn't able to change their behavior because of their lifestyle, we actually managed to reduce their bill by 36%. So it's an interesting exploration of the combination of smart DER and the right kind of price signals that can create real value for a customer and for the network at the same time. And on the back of this kind of work, it's possible to explore whether we could, in the future, consider subsidized batteries as a product based on our savings and the savings for the customer. So this is the last slide. I just want to wrap up some of the things that we've been able to learn through the trials so far. We've been able to develop a framework for very complex power system analysis using a combination of Power Factory and advanced data analytics. We're developing feed-in management or flexible export control strategies that we'll be able to use in the future. We're building core competencies in the management of DER via VPPs in a microgrid setting. And this is informing a very customer-centric approach to DER orchestration. We've gained a lot of experience in building very large data sets. We now have over 180 billion data points in the set that we've got. And we've already commenced knowledge sharing with the Alice Springs Future Grid project. The Carnarvon DER trials will be publishing most of its results around February, March. Some of that's internal to Horizon. Quite a bit of it will be, a lot of the key points will be shared via Arena to the rest of the industry. We're also developing a relationship with the National Energy Analytics Research Program with CSIRO, so a lot of the data that we've collected will be made publicly available. And then Murdoch just completed a really thorough test of inverters and how their drip curve settings perform under different conditions, and that was passed over to the 4777 committee in their public consultation deliberations. So to summarise, I want to emphasise how important collaboration is with external entities for our development in this space. They've helped to challenge our current practices and helped us to experiment in new ways of doing business that are potentially more consistent with the visionary future state that we have around being a digital utility. Actively experimenting with new ideas and to view reasonable mistakes as a natural part of the learning process. We found that collaboration with external entities has helped us to assess new technologies and shine a light on any of the blind spots that we have in our own organisation and reduce our own groupthink. And they help us to adopt the values and skills and capabilities that we envisage that a digital utility should possess in the future. So to conclude, the Carnarvon DER trials, they're progressing very well. We're moving into the reporting phase and everything's on track despite COVID. And it's bringing a great deal of experiential value into the business, and the relationship with Arena is going fantastically well. I would recommend them to anybody. They're such a great organisation to deal with. So thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you so much. So for those of you who submitted questions, I'll be inviting you to unmute your audio and ask your questions live. So if you're not able to do so, I can ask a question on your behalf. Just raise a hand or make some indication. So before asking your question, please introduce yourself with your name and affiliation. So let's start off, look at the Q&A. So I'd like to bring forward John Neve to ask his question. And let's see, there we go.
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, just my question is just how important is maximising, improving our infrastructure so we can, maximise the utilisation of the, of renewables.
Well, it's very important. I mean, we've all heard the same story again and again. The infrastructure's been built for one-way energy flow. We're now grappling with two-way energy flow. Some assets are overloaded, some are not. What we're doing with the trials is trying to get a very deep understanding of how renewable energy variability is impacting those assets and what we can do to improve the performance of those assets and the power station before we have to resort to more complicated and complex control methodologies. We did a lot of analysis on the fluctuation factor and diversity factor of PV, which are very important factors when you're calculating hosting capacity. And what we realized was we had suspected that some of our factors had been a little bit conservative because we had used probabilistic analysis in deriving those factors. By actually having the chance to measure real data, we were able to tighten up those calculations, and that supported the release of an extra 10 megawatts of hosting capacity across our networks last year. But interestingly enough, what we found when we were looking at fluctuation factor was the variability from inverters not performing properly was far worse than the variability caused by changes in cloud events. And so there is a huge opportunity to improve inverter performance, which will thus improve network performance. I think the problem with inverters is bigger than any of us expected, and that'll be the challenge for the next couple of years for all of us.
So next I'd like to invite Adrian McMillan to ask his question. There we go. Adrian.
Yep. Thank you, David. That was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate that. Very insightful there. And your inverter comment is really quite telling because there's so many inverters across the state that you've got to tackle.
Yes.
So my question here, and it's going to be connected to the inverters there, is the unit cost for batteries, sub 1 megawatt hour capacity batteries really hasn't depreciated or reduced much. So the business case is for larger scale batteries, whereas smaller capacity batteries distributed around communities or household would really help balance that, provided you get the inverter working correctly. Where do you see that battery opportunity based on your knowledge there? You know, is it the household, community, or is it large scale?
There are different economic drivers for both solutions. I've done a lot of work with my team. I mean, I say I've got a team of people behind me that do all the hard work. I just do all the blah, blah, blah. We've been working on behind the meter equipment, but you need to recognize, certainly in our service area, that we've got 70% of our customers are in rentals, so they can't afford to put PV systems or batteries on their houses. So enabling them to participate in this energy transition then becomes the role of community batteries and larger scale batteries, which might sit at the power station or somewhere convenient on the network. And that often offers a whole bunch of opportunities for people to buy into a larger scheme and still save money. Whereas we're all hoping that the price of smaller batteries is going to continue to drop. And I think certainly with the withdrawal of premium feed-in tariffs, people will start to think about whether a battery is going to work for them. And then really it comes into a situation of how do we start to communicate with, get visibility of, and maybe even control some of those assets which sit behind the traditional utility boundary, which is the meter. There is the hands-on approach, which is people like Switched In and Reposit and Redback, who have excellent products. But there could be another approach that we take, which is that we just start to send the right pricing signals, because for decades we've been sending completely the wrong pricing signals and then spending a fortune trying to get our networks to operate better because we're sending completely the wrong signals to customers, and they're reacting in exactly the way you would expect them to behave. So I think there's a balance which we all need to explore around how can we incentivize customers to invest in DER, but also reward them appropriately for doing that and bring them into that trusted partner relationship. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think that's a useful insight, is there's going to be an answer and a place for all of these, and it depends on
there isn't one silver bullet. It's going to be multiple different tools that we use in different places. Who do you work for, Adrian?
I'm representing myself at the moment. So
cool. Excellent. Didn't want to put you on the spot. Just wondered if you were from Western Power or Synergy or something like that.
No, I'm not in that space. All right, thank you.
I'd like to invite Alicia White to speak, ask a question.
Thanks, Kelvin. It's Alicia White from Energy Networks Australia. I'm interested
Hi, Alicia.
Hi, David, that the inverters were not configured properly and that some were still on the factory settings. So is this a failure of the installers? And how are you addressing it? Do you educate the owners and installers that the settings are wrong? Do you adjust it for them and give them a call? I mean, how can you fix it?
Yeah, look, we're trying to figure that out at the moment. Look, what I have found, what I will say in defense of the electricians in Carnarvon, is that we haven't had these sorts of problems with the local electricians. They're very fastidious about looking after their own patch. But in any town or any suburb, you're going to get people that come from somewhere else, and sure, they basically want to get in, drop the equipment and get out as quickly as possible. So leaving it on the default or setting it to the settings for South Africa, whatever they need to do so that they don't have to come back, because that starts to erode their profit margin.
Of course.
What I think we need to do as an industry is embrace installers, and we need to dramatically improve the relationship we have with installers. Technology is moving really fast. They have a lot to keep up with, and we keep coming up with all this weird and wonderful technology, and they're expected to learn and do training courses and understand how all these different bits of equipment need to be commissioned and installed. We have to do a much better job of bringing installers closer to us, so that, because they're effectively the weak point in this glorious future that we're all imagining, where everything's going to be fantastic and it's a sort of a techtopia. We need to work harder on working with installers, and that they can set appropriate expectations for customers. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. I mean, with the inverter audit in Carnarvon, we made that mandatory, because we were really seeing some quite high voltages that were a little bit of concern.
Yeah.
And customers have been fantastic. They're getting back to us. They're letting us come onto their property and have a looking at their equipment. And we're starting to build a picture of what is actually happening out there and where is there room for improvement on, firstly, getting the settings right on the equipment, but then maybe moving some of these systems to different phases so that it doesn't put the network under such a great deal of stress. That we hope will improve network operation and release more hosting capacity.
Good. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'd like to invite Neil Marshman to ask his question.
David, great work, and having played in data lakes some years ago and I think drowned sadly, I'm really pleased to hear that someone's making great use of it. My question, though, is the pros and cons of solar farms versus rooftop solar, particularly in your sort of fairly remote regions. And is there sort of significant overheads in dealing with individuals in rooftop solar that solar farms might have some benefits in this type of area? So general question of pros and cons of rooftop versus solar farms for you.
Look, I think Neil, it's horses for courses, right? I mean, there are situations when PV behind the meter is more suitable, and then there's certainly in towns where there just isn't that opportunity to put that much PV on rooftops. Then a solar farm can jump in, and if the economics are right, then that's great. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, in some of our towns, we lose every kilowatt hour that we sell, and we are certainly exploring the opportunity to get centralized PV onto every single one of our networks where it is economically right and where it's beneficial to the customers. So we could put a large PV farm on a small town and then give customers an opportunity to buy a portion of that. And those are the sorts of innovative products that I'm talking about, where we actually start to draw customers into the energy transition, and that we kind of reduce the number of people that are just getting left out. Certainly there's a place for both, definitely. And you may know that in Horizon Power, we've also developed a standalone system where we're taking customers off the network altogether and putting them on small standalone diesel battery PV systems. And these are quite useful, especially where we run long swirl lines in the south of the state. You might run a 50-kilometre swirl line and have 3 customers on the end. And when that swirl line comes up for replacement, it's a no-brainer. It's easier to move those customers onto smaller, bespoke, more reliable systems than to keep maintaining big, long swirl lines, which are in the middle of people's paddocks and sort of get in the way. And also they're a bushfire risk as well. So we're looking at all different options, but the main aim of the game is to gradually transition our business model away from predominantly centralized to predominantly decentralized.
Thanks, David.
I'd like to invite Michael Liu to ask this question on reactive and active power.
Hello. Hi, David. Thank you for the
Hi,
great presentation. Hi, I'm from University of Melbourne. So I mean, I do a lot of system-based modeling. So my question is quite a bit technical question regarding how do you model the reactive power when the capacity of the inverter has been reached? Because we know absorbing reactive power can help with the voltages. But if the solar PV is already generating, I'd say, if it's a 5 kilowatt panel generating a 5 kilowatt, then it's unlikely to be able to provide any reactive power support. So how do you guys, how is this being done in this particular trial?
Okay, so I'll answer this as best I can, because there are people much cleverer than me that did that part of the work. But we had a watt watcher device on each PV system that we were controlling the reactive power on. And we worked with watt watchers to overclock those devices so that we're capturing 5-second data. And that gave us a great deal of visibility about how those systems were performing. And then what we did with the power factor control, it wasn't dynamic. We weren't able to use the Reposit platform to manipulate the power factor settings in the inverter. So what we did was we sent an electrician out and we set them all to the first setting, and then we let them run for a period of time, and then we set them all to the second setting and we let them run. And that was why it was very difficult. I couldn't do one of those fancy animated videos because the data was captured on lots of separate days and it had to be processed to bring it all in line and then do that kind of a presentation. Does that answer your question? I mean, basically it was an electrician going there and programming in the settings that we asked them to put in.
Yes, I mean, that part I understand. It's just that even if you program a power factor, let's just say 0.95 inductive, I mean, depending on the apparent power limit of the inverter, like the inverter might not be able to provide that much reactive power because for 5 kVA inverter, so but
yes, I mean,
they can program that in, but just wondering which one do they prioritize? Is the active power or the reactive power?
So on those experiments, it was the reactive power, and obviously it can only achieve that effect during the middle of the day. But what we'll tell you what we do, Michael. If you can contact me on LinkedIn, I will put you in touch with the guys that modeled it.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask Robin Gardner to ask the question.
Hi, David. Thank you
Robin.
for a great presentation.
Thank you.
I do a bit of work out in remote communities, and frequently we've not been allowed to put on any more solar because it's already up to your limits.
Yes.
And you've sort of half answered the question already, I think. How is that changing and what do you expect it to become in the future?
Well, what we hope is that by having those progressive improvements of, you know, understanding what phase the PV system's connected to, has the inverter got the right settings in, and then exploring things like spinning reserve strategies for the power station, we hope to be able to release more hosting capacity. We're always looking to release more hosting capacity. We have an internal target of no refusals by 2024-25, and we're working hard to solve all of the technical barriers around that. But that's our aim, 0 refusals by 24-25.
So could that mean you'll get to extremely high levels of solar penetration?
Yes, and that is where feed-in management becomes very important.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll just ask Babak Rushdi to come and ask this question.
Hello, thanks David for presentation. I'm from iTron. So my question is about the actual platform that you use for that pilot. So is that something that can be rolled out to a bigger scale? Because as far as I know, the biggest challenge at the moment is actually rolling out these kind of pilots into larger scale.
Yes.
Yeah, and the other question, probably you answered that, but I'm not sure. So I just ask again that in your model, in your pilot model, actually, in your business case, is that distributed storage better off than centralized one? Okay,
so you've asked a lot of questions there. With regards to scale, we chose the Reposit Power product for these particular trials because they had a product that was already existing and had like 95% of the features that we actually wanted. And then as part of the trials, we paid them to develop feed-in management, which was a feature that they didn't have. Reposit product is quite popular in the eastern states, and they run several large VPPs. They had a very well developed platform, very good hardware, and they had an excellent customer-facing app, all of which had thousands of hours of testing. So it was a big de-risking exercise for us to go with them. And then we paid them to develop the extra features we needed. They used the customer internet connection to maintain connectivity between the Reposit box and the platform. And what we did was we developed a feature whereby if the internet connection gets lost, the DER ramps down to 0 export. So the customer can still meet their own needs, but they're just not spilling any excess onto the network. And that incentivizes them to sort out their internet connection. But it also means that if, for instance, a whole town was to lose connection with Reposit, all of the DER systems under Reposit control would ramp down. And then the power station would just pick up that capacity. And it dramatically reduces any kind of endangerment to the network. And then it gives us a little bit of breathing space to figure out what exactly has gone wrong. Now, you work for Itron, so you know that in Onslow, well, you know for a fact that we've got Itron mesh over every single one of our towns because we use the smart meter network. And then you backhaul through 3G, or we backhaul through 3G. In Onslow, which is another large microgrid town that we're doing a lot of experiments in, we're actually scoping up a project where we can start to communicate with DER systems over the Itron mesh. Because if you're running a 3G or a 4G connection with each individual DER controller, that can get quite expensive, especially if you're using a protocol like IEEE 2030.5, which is a bit chatty. That can really start to ramp up your data costs. So one of the things that we've got scheduled for next year is to start to look at how we can control DER over the mesh network. But it really boils down to whether we want to engage with third-party aggregators or whether we want to be the aggregator. And there's sort of horses for courses. Economics sort of push you in various different directions. Does that answer your question? I feel like I missed a bit.
Yep. Thank you. No, just the second part of that was if you have any idea about the between distributed and centralized storage based on it.
So in Onslow, we've got a megawatt scale battery at the power station and a megawatt scale battery at the sub. And we've got 1 megawatt hour of energy storage distributed behind customers' meters. And that piece of work is looking at where the value is with having all of this energy storage. We've actually gone hydrocarbons off in Onslow for very brief periods of time. We're still trying to get that right. And in Carnarvon, what we did was we took that feeder that was mentioned in the presentation. We took that hydrocarbons off, or diesel off. We disconnected it from the network, and we actually ran that feeder using customer PV and a community battery. So we're doing lots of different experiments to look at, you know, if you do that sort of arrangement, what does that do to your protection systems? How do you do a black start? How do you deal with motor starts? What's happening with power factor? We're edging our way in that direction, but there's quite a lot that you need to sort out from a technical point of view, and also the impact that it has on your operational practices and your field crews and that sort of stuff. It's we're kind of gradually walking in that direction.
So it means for probably a foreseeable time in the future, we would have both solutions at the same time.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's not one or the other. There's a whole suite of options out there, and you just find a way of balancing what you've got.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I'd like to return John Neve back to ask his question on fossil fuel costs.
I'm just wondering, the money that's currently still spent on fossil fuels, how far would that go in alleviating a lot of these issues? Hello?
I'm sorry, yeah, that was a bit stretched out. I think your question was somewhere around the price of fossil fuel, and are these situations reducing the amount of fossil fuel consumed? Was that right, John?
No. The current money that's still spent on fossil fuels, how far would that go?
Yeah, okay. No, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that question. I mean, obviously we're only running small trials here, so we're not offsetting a huge amount of PV. Oh, sorry, we're not offsetting a huge amount of fossil fuel consumption with these small trials. Certainly with more and more uptake, that's going to reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we consume. I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I think our focus is definitely on reducing our diesel consumption in the regional towns, definitely. And we've got a target to dramatically reduce that. And part of the way that we're going to do that is to stimulate the energy transition by getting more and more PV behind people's meters in those towns where it makes economic sense to do that.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Jeremy, but that has to do with retailers here in Melbourne. So I'd hazard David would not be as familiar with that variety.
David may not be Kelvin, but I wondered, you might be able to answer this question. Look, I loved your talk. I'm not an engineer, so much of it went over my head. I'm a consumer of electricity. And I'll just read my question out if I may, Kelvin. We have solar panels on a roof here in Melbourne, which we want to supplement with more panels and a battery. And of course, my basic motivation's climate change, but also get with a good revolution when you see one. We also have solar analytic info management system. Mm-hmm. And I would love to become part of a VPP here in Melbourne. Who here might be able to help us out on the next step in the kind of imaginative way you've adumbrated? You've led my mind to imagine all sorts of possibilities. I've heard a talk from one of Reposit's principals, but who do I go and talk to? Solar Analytics, Reposit, Enviro Group, who installed our system. By the way, they've given me a quote on a supplementary system, but there was no talk of setting the defaults on the inverters. I have no idea what being VPP ready is.
Yeah, I would imagine, Jeremy, that if I would hope that your settings are okay. I mean, it sounds like you've got a pretty reputable company there.
They're very good.
Yeah, no, so I would imagine you might be in the clear there as far as inverter settings are concerned, and you probably don't have to worry about that, but I could be wrong. When it comes to getting involved in a VPP, look, I'm not sure what the retail arrangement is where you are in Melbourne, but I would definitely reach out to people like Switched In, Reposit, Redback are the only three that I know of. I don't know if there's any others, but also maybe have a chat with your retailer to see if they've got something that they can offer, because if you're willing to invest, I'm sure that they're willing to share some of that value with you.
And great. Two of those names I didn't know. And I might mention that we've had the offer to join a VPP, but it was so hands-off. In other words, we'll come and install the supplementary system. Will it fit with my old system? Oh, well, we'll see about that when we install it. So I'll follow those leads up. Many thanks.
Yeah, no, cool. Thank you for asking.
Well, we're almost there. Now, I guess I've got my question for you, Dave, is how has Horizon Power addressed sending those price signals to households?
Yeah. So we in the trials, we basically just programmed it into the Reposit box. So with the battery optimization, we just tricked the Reposit box into thinking that the customer was on a completely different tariff arrangement by programming those settings in and just letting it do its thing. We did fiddle around with different settings, but the Synergy one worked really well. So it worked well with our climate and the availability of sun and that sort of thing in the customer's load. So we stuck with that one. Horizon Power's in quite a fortunate place because we are vertically integrated and we can tap into different parts of the value chain. That we've been experimenting with different types of tariff products for our customers for a couple of years now. And if anybody's interested, if you go to our website, which is horizonpower.com.au, and look up My Power, which is a very innovative tariff product. I think we've got about 1,200 customers on that, and they're managing to save a reasonable amount of money from their bills on that. But it's all part of the efforts that we're looking at to what's the best way we can use this emerging technology for our customers to save some money. Because I think one of the things that might not be apparent to people in the eastern states is that a lot of our customers, especially from Perth upwards, they have massive power bills because of the air conditioning. You know, where some of us might be happy with a $200 to $400 bill, some of our customers, their bills start at $1,000 and go up to $2,500 because they will have 6 or 7 air conditioners on their house. And so they are very interested in anything that we come up with to help them save money. And we're very interested in reducing that load on our network because that is what's driving investment.
Great. So I will now bring this to a close. So thank you so much, Dave. And that presentation was entirely useful and to shape and build this discussion.
Yeah, look,
So,
happy for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn, but if you do, please put in the note that you actually were at this presentation and you'd like to follow up on something, and then I'll answer it, because it's just not, I wouldn't have a life if I just responded to everybody on LinkedIn.
Thank you. So,
Right, thank you very much.
Okay, so finally, just for details of upcoming events, please visit the Climate and Energy College and Energy Transition Hub websites. And the next webinar in this series on consumer-centric energy will be held on Wednesday, the 25th of November at 11 a.m. and it's being presented by Mark Patterson of Strategy Consulting on what is human-centered electricity? What is a human-centered electricity system?
Very clever guy. Thoroughly recommend, Mark.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you so much once again, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.